All right, so welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at the Aga Khan, specifically his wealth and lifestyle.
Yeah.
And he's a figure who I think sparks a lot of curiosity, sometimes a bit of controversy. And we've got this really cool YouTube video. It's called The Real Story Behind the Aga Khan's Wealth and Lifestyle Urdu. And it's from the channel Ismaili Essence. What's really interesting is it features insights, not just from kind of like historians or journalists, but from the Aga Khan himself as well as people close to him. So it seems like we're going to get a really like unique perspective here.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really interesting about this video is that it directly challenges some of those kind of, more splashy headlines
Mhm.
that we see about the Aga Khan, especially in, I think, Western media. And he seems to be quite concerned about the image that's portrayed.
Right. And it's not even like just like a subtle rebuttal. He really tackles this head on, these misconceptions about his lifestyle, and like really makes it clear that it's not about extravagant displays of wealth for him.
Yeah, and he really contrasts the perceived opulence and extravagance
Yeah.
with the reality of life for most of the Ismaili community, who he leads, who mostly reside in developing countries and live very modest lives.
There's this one quote that I think really encapsulates this. He says, "This image of easy living is perhaps not a correct image. I don't seek those things. On the contrary, I always try to avoid those things which seem to me to be inappropriate, where wealth is used simply for display."
Yeah, I think that's really telling.
Hmm.
You mentioned controversy before, and I think one of the things that often raises eyebrows is the Aga Khan's private jet, which
Right.
on the surface could be seen as a symbol of, excess.
I mean, at first glance, it does seem to kind of contradict
Hmm.
this message of simplicity.
Yeah.
But I think the video does an interesting job of reframing that by presenting this idea that this jet is really just a tool. It's a tool for him to effectively manage this huge responsibility of leading a global community spread across 35 different countries.
Yeah, and they actually quantify that, saying it's the equivalent of him gaining 2 extra months for work travel every year.
Oh, wow.
It's almost like, imagine a busy executive constantly on the move for important meetings.
Right. That's a really good analogy.
Hmm.
I think that really highlights how even with wealth, like time is a valuable resource,
Yeah.
and especially when you're dedicated to serving so many people.
And that sort of commitment to practicality, I think, extends beyond just the jet. There are these anecdotes sprinkled throughout the video that highlight his remarkably simple lifestyle, even going back to his time at Harvard.
Oh, yeah, like how we hear from his former roommate Swenson, who says, he was a delightful fellow with a wonderful sense of humor. His material wants were very few. Like, can you imagine a Harvard student today
Yeah.
saying that about someone?
It's pretty remarkable,
Yeah.
especially when you consider he had access to, family funds, yet he chose to rely on public transportation instead of having a car. And Swenson even notes that he only owned 2 suits.
Two suits.
Just 2 suits.
That's wild. It makes you wonder about like his values.
Right, like what drives these choices?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's such a stark contrast to the image that's often portrayed.
And it's not just from his younger years or something. There's this story from the 1970s where even his own mother was trying to convince him to get a new suit.
Yeah.
Like his friends were noticing holes in his shoes. I mean, this commitment to simplicity, it really seems to be like a long-held principle for him.
It's really interesting to see these anecdotes because they challenge those assumptions that we tend to have about wealth and what it means to live a fulfilling life.
Yeah, it suggests that material possessions don't necessarily equal happiness
Exactly.
or even define your priorities,
Right.
even for someone like the Aga Khan. So let's talk about another thing that I think people kind of raise their eyebrows at, his development project in Sardinia. Because a lot of times that's used as this example
Yeah.
of extravagant spending.
Right.
But the video kind of tells a different story.
It suggests that this project was driven by his desire for a peaceful sanctuary amidst what he perceived as, constant media scrutiny and public misunderstanding of his role.
It's like he was seeking out a haven of natural beauty, and he also was really focused on preventing overdevelopment,
Right.
which, I mean, that seems to align with a sense of responsibility
Yeah.
towards the environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's this kind of like irony, would you say?
Definitely there's an unintended consequence.
Yeah.
It seems that while he was seeking personal retreat, the project ended up transforming Sardinia into this kind of model for sustainable development that ended up inspiring other leaders.
Oh, wow. So it kind of backfired in a good way?
You could say that.
Yeah.
And there's this quote where he expresses his surprise at how many African and East Asian leaders have actually reached out to him, saying, come and do the same for us.
Wow. So it's like this personal pursuit of peace
Yeah.
inadvertently created this ripple effect of positive change.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it is. That's a really great example of how, like, even personal choices,
Yeah.
right, can have this much broader impact. So when it comes to this development approach, what were some of the specific principles he implemented in Sardinia?
Well, he focused on preserving the natural beauty of the coastline, while also creating this model for responsible tourism. And he established these very strict building codes to limit the height and density of development, to ensure that new structures blended harmoniously with the existing landscape. But it went beyond that. He also championed ecological preservation, creating protected areas and promoting sustainable practices among local businesses.
So it wasn't just about, like, building fancy resorts. It sounds like he was really invested in, like, the long-term health of the environment and the community.
Exactly. And this approach really seemed to resonate with other leaders, particularly those in developing countries facing similar challenges. They saw Sardinia as a potential blueprint for how to balance economic growth with environmental responsibility.
That's fascinating. So this, like, personal retreat
Yeah.
turned into this, like, showcase for responsible development.
It did.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But that kind of brings us to this next point.
Yeah.
Which is, the source of the Aga Khan's wealth.
Yeah.
And how it's utilized. Because obviously that plays a big role in all this.
Yeah, and the video is very clear in emphasizing that his wealth is not about personal indulgence. It's about uplifting the Ismaili community and really driving development initiatives, especially in the developing world.
So it's not just about donating money. It sounds like it's more about this strategic use of resources for a bigger purpose.
Exactly. It's about creating a lasting impact, not just temporary relief.
And the video kind of portrays him as, like, deeply involved in all this, not just like someone writing checks from afar.
Definitely.
So what are some examples of the specific projects or initiatives that he's been involved in?
Well, he's been a major force behind establishing schools and hospitals, as well as economic development programs in some of the poorest regions of the world. For example, the Aga Khan Development Network, which he chairs, has been instrumental in revitalizing historic cities like Kabul in Afghanistan. And they've really focused on restoring cultural heritage while also improving living conditions.
So it's this blend of, like, cultural preservation with social and economic upliftment.
Right.
It's pretty awesome. And I feel like this commitment really stems from his values and how he interprets his role as the imam of the Ismaili Muslims.
It's not just about charity, it's about empowerment. He often talks about investing in education and healthcare as pathways to break the cycle of poverty.
Yeah, it's about giving people the tools to help themselves,
Yeah.
which is, way more impactful in the long run. It really makes you wonder, like, what if this philosophy was more widespread? What if more people with vast resources approach philanthropy in this strategic way, focusing on long-term impact rather than just, like, short-term aid?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, just imagine the potential for change
Right.
if wealth was more consistently viewed as a tool for social good.
But I think a lot of times we see this disconnect between wealth and social responsibility.
Definitely.
And it seems like the Aga Khan is offering this counter-narrative to that, like his personal frugality. Even while leading this global community, it challenges everything we think we know about what it means to be wealthy
It really does.
and how those resources can be used.
It encourages us to look beyond the surface and consider the deeper implications of wealth.
It's not just about how much you have, but how you use it to make a difference.
Absolutely.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about, too. It's really challenged my own perceptions about wealth and what it can be used for.
It's been pretty insightful, right? Like, we really got into these complexities of wealth and responsibility and social impact. And we did it all through this lens of a figure who doesn't really fit the mold.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So I think for anyone listening, this is a reminder to maybe question some of those assumptions and recognize that, like, real leadership often comes from a commitment to something bigger than yourself.
It's about recognizing that, like, regardless of, financial status, we all have a role to play in creating a more equitable and sustainable world.
I love that.
And maybe the Aga Khan story is a way to see what can happen when you really use your resources for good.
It's a pretty powerful message.
Yeah.
And one that I think, our listeners are going to resonate with because they're always looking to learn and grow.
For sure. And I think this deep dive really challenged some common assumptions. I mean, we often hear about his, luxurious lifestyle, but this exploration painted such a more nuanced picture.
Yeah, his personal frugality is, like, deeply connected to his commitment to his community
Yeah.
and creating positive change, especially in the developing world.
Almost like a deliberate choice to
Yeah,
amplify his impact on a global scale.
it makes you wonder, what if more people in power saw wealth as a tool to uplift others and tackle those big challenges facing the world?
Right, that's the question this deep dive leaves us with. What if his philosophy was the norm, not the exception?
Could we see, a real shift away from just spending on ourselves towards a more conscious and impactful approach to wealth?
I think it's definitely possible. Just imagine if philanthropy moved beyond just like traditional charity and became more strategic,
Okay.
more about empowering communities, creating that lasting change.
That's a really inspiring thought, and one that I hope stays with our listeners.
Me too. This has been such a cool journey exploring these complex issues. I think it shows how these deep dives can really challenge us and broaden our understanding.
Absolutely. That's what we aim for every episode, right?
Yeah.
We want to give our listeners that deeper understanding and the tools to, actually make a difference.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep making that positive impact.
I love it.